you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It is quite an honor to be here today, primarily because I passed through the borough in 1774 and 75, going to and from continental congresses that met. The first one in 74 was a disaster. I mean, when I walked in, I was quite shy, and only because I was facing the greatest minds of the colonies. So many of them lawyers, and that's why nothing got done. So we had to have our second Continental Congress, and there I was not so shy. I was forceful, arguing for independency. Normally I talk about myself. This time I've been asked to discuss Summerseat and the amazing patriots who lived here, without whom you might be having tea and crumpets instead, because we would still be English controlled. First, Summerseat, and I've heard the name Summerseat all through today. It actually wasn't Summerseat when it was first built. It was George Clymer, one of the last founding fathers to reside here, who named it Summerseat. Before that, it was merely a home, a residence, a very comfortable place in which to live. It was built by Mr. Adam Hoops in and about 1765. He was one of the wealthiest men in the area, which was rather interesting for his background. As lore has it, he arrived in the area wearing buckskin and toting a musket, which was needed in those days, and making keg whiskey, obviously needed in those days. Well, he had a knack for business, and over the years developed successful trade, and ultimately decided that he would settle here. So he built this marvelous Georgian mansion. And he lived here until he died in 1771. He had, I believe, 8 daughters, one of whom, Mary, happened to meet a young man named Thomas Barclay. Barclay had been, is an Irishman who comes over to this country to make his fortune. His father had been involved in trade and shipping, and he followed suit. He had been trained by a master, and soon he too became prominent in these colonies. And as luck would have it, he met Mary Hoops, and they were wed. He was a patriot, and he belonged to a St. Patrick's Club in Philadelphia. And they were among the leading forces to stir the pot in Philadelphia, to get people thinking about independency. Why independency? I'm just going to give you 2 very quick examples. You, sir, you live in a splendid house. I'm a British officer. We've decided we'd like your house so much, we are going to use it. Get out. Take your family, leave the possessions. They're going to suit us well. Leave. That's tyranny. Or let's say, young man, you're working on a ship, a Massachusetts ship. You're out at sea. The British come along, they board that ship and they say, oh, you're a strapping young man. You are now pressed into our Navy. You don't get to say goodbye to your family or friends. You are whisked away. Is that fair? No, that is tyranny. Just 2 examples of what we were fighting for in our revolution. Now then, Mr. Barclay served a great deed, or performed a great deed for the general. And it was very simply this. We all know the general won the war, but he wasn't so lucky at first. Indeed, after the Battle of New York, he was chased by the British all the way from New York, through Jersey, ultimately to here. And that's when he met Patrick Hovan. Patrick Hovan ferried the general and the men that had survived the battle in New York across the Delaware River. And he also contacted the other ferries. There were some 8 ferries along the river at that time. And once Washington's troops were safe on this side, those crafty men went out along the river and stole all the boats on the New Jersey side. So when the British came up and they said they're going to follow, no, they couldn't. Thomas Barclay provided the general Summerseat as a resting place for his bloodied and tired troops. And the general was demoralized. Of course he was. He had not only been defeated in battle where he had been outnumbered some 2-1, but many of his men, when they surrendered, were slaughtered. Others were piled aboard prison ships and hauled away, never to be seen again. Washington was a beaten man when he came here to Summerseat. Then he looked out that window and was able to look over at Trenton and see the encampment there. At that window, he began to form a plan. Days, I believe. Then he left, went on to Newtown and other places, ultimately arriving at McConkey's Ferry, where on Christmas night, his troops would cross the Delaware and rout the Hessians in Trenton on the 26th. They never saw it coming. They were so busy in their revelry from Christmas that they were the proverbial sitting ducks. Now, this is where I mentioned Robert Morris, for whom this borough is now named, incorporated, I believe, in 2004, in his honor. Morris came to this country at the age of 13, and he came to join his father. His father had left for the Americas because he didn't like his wife over in England. And he found another woman, and young Rob showed up and met his father. Really, since he was so young when the father left, it was like meeting him for the first time. The father was a ladies' man, gay blade, and the wife he had now did not like young Rob. So, to keep peace in the home, Rob was taken to Philadelphia, where he was apprenticed to a Mr. Charles Willing, who was one of the largest tradesmen, shipping magnates in the colonies. And it turned out Rob Morris had a keen eye for business. He soon became a partner, and Willing became Willing and Morris. Now, I bring him up at this point in the story because you know of the Battle of Trenton and the Battle of Princeton. Washington had just been defeated in New York. Everything was in shambles. He had no money. His troops were ready to boycott and just walk away because they wanted pay. What to do? Steps forward Robert Morris, who loved the idea of fighting back enough to finance Washington's crossing, the Battle of Trenton, and the Battle of Princeton. His monies provided weapons that were needed, and he did it out of love of a country not yet born. We move on. I come across Robert Morris at the Continental Congress, and by this time, we're getting close to the vote for independency. The vote for independency had to be unanimous. All 13 colonies had to agree. In the Pennsylvania delegation, we had 7 men. Robert Morris, Benjamin Franklin, James Wilson, Charles Humphreys, John Dickinson, Tom Willing, the son of Charles Willing, and now Robert's close friend, and a Mr. John Morton. Pennsylvania, oddly enough, became one of the colonies that was most opposed to independency, primarily because Morris and Dickinson both argued, England is our leading trading partner. It makes no sense whatsoever to go to war with your leading trading partner. Are you insane? Well, no. We were successful in arguing that the people, listen to the people in the street. What did they have to say? They did. But Morris and Dickinson, when they realized the vote was going to be 5-3 against independency, because they were already on record as being in opposition, they did not want to go against their own word. So how did Pennsylvania vote for independency? Very simple. They didn't want to go against their word, but they didn't want to go against public will at the same time. They didn't want Pennsylvania to be known as the colony that scuttled the whole concept. So on the day of the vote, July 2nd, 1776, they did not show up. They stayed home. And Pennsylvania was able to vote yay for independency. Now, Morris and the general would have further relationships because the general relied so much on his business acumen and his financial skills. So much so that when the war ended, and the general, as president, was putting together his cabinet, he went to Morris and asked him to be the first Secretary of the Treasury. Now, I understand there is a show somewhere about Alexander Hamilton, but it was Morris who turned down the job, and that's how Hamilton got it. Morris, being the businessman, thought, I can make more money as a U.S. Senator than I can running the Treasury. Now, you look around here, and as they were attempting to come up with new location for our capital, Morris came up with a wonderful idea. It had to be along a river. That was the major condition. It had to be on a river, and we have the Delaware right here. So Morris bought up property on the other side of the river and on this side. Hence, he put so much investment into this area, people started calling it Morrisville, even though it had not officially been named that. And he had an entire city block, or borough block in this case, encompassed his estate. He had the largest horse stables in the colonies. That's how rich he was. When it came time to put the president in a home in the Capitol in Philadelphia, Robert Morris stepped forward and gave his house to the governor. During the struggles of the war, Robert Morris knew that our currency was no good. He invented the Morris note, and he wrote documents that were used as cash throughout the colonies, and he honored every one of those notes when the war was over. That is a patriot, ladies and gentlemen. Long story short, he believed so much in the investment of this country. He started buying lands out west, knowing there would be an expansion. Along the way, he had made political enemies. And those political enemies went around and they bought up some of his debt. And they forced him into debtor's prison, where he languished. Washington, his best friend by that time, they used to fish at the Delaware River together, would go and visit Morris in prison, Front Street Prison, during the height of a cholera epidemic, and tell his friend, I'm the president. Come with me, they'll let you out. No, said Morris. I believe in the law. The law put me in here, and I will stay here until the law is changed. Congress ultimately did change the laws under which he was incarcerated, and he was free. He was free, he was broke, beaten down from years of his own perceived failure, a proud man, stripped of his pride. Until toward the end of his days, that spark lit in him again, and he thought, I can make my fortune once more, this time dealing with antiques. And he was very busy making those plans when he did ultimately pass away. Now then, quickly Thomas Barclay, who had welcomed into Summerseat the general, was named to be the first diplomatic consul abroad by our new government. The two first diplomats were Ambassador Benjamin Franklin and Consul Thomas Barclay. Now the interesting thing with him is, Jefferson and I corresponded much during this time because there was a request from a potentate in Morocco who wanted to make a treaty with this new country. And who was going to go? Washington had ideas of whom the general, not the capital. He had ideas who to send, but that person wasn't available. So corresponding back and forth across the waters, Jefferson and I decided Barclay's the man. He wound up going there, and ladies and gentlemen, negotiated the first treaty that these United States had with another nation. A treaty still in existence today, the longest lasting treaty in the history of the world. I would say that these rooms have indeed known great men. Great events were born here. And thank God they did. Thank you very much for your attention.